Agent Sarah Chen adjusted her earpiece one final time as she crouched behind the concrete barrier. The moonless night provided perfect cover for what intelligence had labeled as a routine infiltration mission. At 28, Sarah had completed over 40 successful operations across 3 continents, earning her reputation as one of the most skilled operatives in the Special Forces unit. The target facility loomed before her like a sleeping giant. The pharmaceutical research compound stretched across 12 acres in the remote mountains of Eastern Europe, its white buildings gleaming under the security floodlights. According to her briefing, the facility housed illegal biological weapons research, funded by a shadowy international syndicate. Sarah's mission was simple: infiltrate, gather evidence, and extract without detection. Her handler's voice crackled through the earpiece. "Phoenix, you have green light. Remember, this is intelligence gathering only. No engagement unless absolutely necessary. Copy that, Control," Sarah whispered back, her breath forming small clouds in the cold mountain air. She checked her equipment one last time: night vision goggles, lockpicks, camera, silent pistol, and her most important tool, a prototype cloaking device that rendered her nearly invisible to both human eyes and security cameras. The cloaking technology was still experimental, developed by the military's top scientists. Sarah was one of only 3 operatives cleared to field test the device. It worked by bending light around her body, creating an optical illusion that made her blend seamlessly with her surroundings. The device had a 4-hour battery life and had never failed during training exercises. Sarah activated the cloak and felt the familiar tingling sensation as the device hummed to life around her. Looking down, she could barely see her own hands. The technology never ceased to amaze her, even after months of training with it. She began her approach toward the facility's eastern wall, moving with the fluid grace that years of training had ingrained in her muscle memory. The intelligence report indicated 50 guards patrolled the compound in rotating shifts. Most were stationed at checkpoints and monitoring stations, with only a handful conducting active patrols. Sarah had memorized their routes, timing, and behavioral patterns. She knew that Guard Station Alpha would have a shift change in exactly 14 minutes, creating a 90-second window for her to slip past the main gate. As she moved closer to the perimeter fence, Sarah noticed something that hadn't appeared in any of her briefings. Fresh tire tracks in the mud led to a service entrance on the north side of the compound. The tracks were recent, made within the last few hours. Someone had arrived unexpectedly, and that deviation from normal operations made Sarah's instincts prickle with unease. She reached the fence and examined the security measures. Standard razor wire topped the 12-foot chain-link barrier, but no electric current ran through it according to her scanner. Motion sensors were positioned every 30 feet, but they were calibrated to detect normal human-sized objects. The cloaking device should render her invisible to their detection algorithms. Sarah scaled the fence with practiced efficiency, her movements precise and silent. Years of rock climbing and gymnastics training had given her the strength and agility needed for such operations. She dropped silently to the other side and immediately froze, listening for any sign that her intrusion had been detected. The facility hummed with the low drone of generators and air conditioning systems. Voices drifted from the main building, guards making their routine communications checks. Everything seemed normal, yet something felt wrong to Sarah. Her intuition, honed by years of dangerous operations, was sending warning signals that she couldn't ignore. She moved toward the main research building, keeping to the shadows cast by the security lights. The cloaking device worked perfectly, bending light around her as she passed directly under a mounted camera. On her heads-up display, she could see the camera's field of view and confirmed that the lens showed only empty space where she stood. The service door she had targeted was exactly where the blueprint indicated. Sarah knelt beside it and began working with her electronic lockpicks. The device interfaced directly with the door's security system, cycling through possible combinations at superhuman speed. Within 30 seconds, she heard the soft click of the lock disengaging. Sarah eased. The door opened and stepped into the facility's interior. The hallway was dimly lit with emergency lighting, casting long shadows that would provide additional cover even without her cloaking device. The air inside carried a sharp chemical smell that made her nose wrinkle. Whatever research was being conducted here involved some seriously dangerous substances. Her objective was the third floor, where intelligence suggested the main research data was stored. Sarah found the stairwell and began climbing, her soft-soled boots making no sound, on the concrete steps. At each landing, she paused to listen and scan for guards or security measures. Reaching the third floor, Sarah consulted the facility blueprint loaded on her wrist computer. The data server room was located at the end of the main corridor, past several laboratories and offices. She would need to pass at least 3 security checkpoints, but her intelligence suggested they would be minimally staffed during the night shift. As she moved down the corridor, Sarah peered through the windows of the laboratories she passed. Most were empty, their equipment covered with protective sheets. But in one lab she saw something that made her blood run cold. Rows of animal cages lined the walls, and many contained what appeared to be test subjects in various stages of a horrific experiment. The animals showed signs of genetic modification that violated every international treaty on biological research. Sarah quickly photographed everything she could see, knowing this evidence would be crucial for building a case against the facility's operators. The images were automatically uploaded to a secure server via her encrypted communication link. She reached the first security checkpoint and observed the guard through her scope. A single man sat behind a desk, reading a magazine and occasionally glancing at a bank of monitors showing feeds from security cameras throughout the facility. Sarah waited for him to become completely absorbed in his reading, then slipped past his station while remaining cloaked. The second checkpoint was unmanned, just an automated scanner that she bypassed using a frequency jammer built into her equipment. The third checkpoint, however, presented a challenge. 2 guards were stationed there, and they were alert and actively monitoring their surroundings. Sarah studied their patrol pattern for several minutes looking for an opening. One guard remained at the desk while the other walked a circuit that took him away from his post for exactly 2 minutes and 15 seconds. During his next circuit, Sarah would have her chance to reach the server room. As the roving guard began his patrol, Sarah moved forward, her cloaked form invisible to both men. She was halfway past their station when the unexpected happened. The cloaking device began emitting a high-pitched whine that grew louder with each second. The guards looked up from their posts, confusion evident on their faces as they tried to identify the source of the sound. Sarah's heart pounded as the cloaking device continued its ominous whining. The sound grew louder, and she could feel the device's casing becoming uncomfortably warm against her back. Years of training kicked in as she assessed her rapidly deteriorating situation. The 2 guards were now standing, their hands moving instinctively toward their weapons as they tried to locate the source of the strange noise. "Did you hear that?" the first guard asked in heavily accented English, his eyes scanning the corridor where Sarah stood frozen. "Yeah, it's coming from somewhere over there," the second guard replied, pointing directly at Sarah's position. "Sounds like some kind of equipment malfunction." Sarah knew she had seconds before the device would fail completely. She could see sparks beginning to arc across her peripheral vision as the cloaking technology overloaded. The experimental nature of the device meant there were no backup protocols, no failsafe to prevent total system failure. She was about to become visible in the middle of a high-security facility with 50 armed guards. The whining reached a crescendo, and then suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah looked down and saw her hands materializing as the light-bending field collapsed around her. Within 3 seconds, she was completely visible, standing in the middle of the corridor like a ghost, suddenly made flesh. The guard's eyes widened in shock and disbelief. For a moment, nobody moved. Sarah used that split second of confusion to her advantage, knowing that her survival now depended entirely on speed, skill, and ruthless efficiency. "Intruder!" one of the guards shouted, reaching for his radio to alert the entire facility. Sarah moved like lightning, covering the 20-foot distance between them in 2 swift strides. Her first strike was a precise blow to the guard's throat, crushing his larynx and preventing him from completing his warning. He collapsed, gasping for air that would never come. The second guard managed to draw his pistol, but Sarah was already inside his reach. She grabbed his wrist and twisted with tremendous force, Hearing the bone snap as the weapon clattered to the floor, a sharp elbow strike to his temple ended the confrontation before he could scream. Sarah stood over the two bodies, her mind racing through the implications of what had just happened. The mission was compromised, but she was still deep inside, the facility with vital intelligence to gather. Every second she remained increased the risk of discovery, but retreating now would mean the entire operation was a failure. She quickly searched the guards and found their security cards, communication, devices, and weapons. The facility's alarm system hadn't been triggered yet, which meant she might have a few more minutes before their absence was noticed during the next check-in cycle. Sarah dragged both bodies into a nearby supply closet, using her training to position them in a way that would delay discovery if someone casually opened the door. She then used one of their security cards to access the server room, knowing this would create an electronic record of her presence but having no other choice. The server room was larger than she had expected, filled with rows of humming computer equipment. Banks of hard drives stored terabytes of research data, financial records, and communication logs. Sarah connected her portable data extraction device to the main server and began downloading everything she could find. While the download progressed, she explored the physical files stored in cabinets around the room. What she found exceeded her worst fears about the facility's activities. Documents detailed experiments on human subjects, plans for releasing biological agents in populated areas, and financial transactions with terrorist organizations across 3 continents. Sarah photographed everything, knowing that even if she didn't survive the mission, the evidence would automatically upload to intelligence servers. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. This wasn't just a rogue research facility. It was the operational hub for a network planning biological attacks on civilian populations. Her data extraction device chimed softly, indicating the download was complete. Sarah had acquired over 2 terabytes of classified information that would expose the entire network. But getting that information out of the facility alive was now her greatest challenge. She checked her watch and realized the guards' shift change would occur in 6 minutes. Their absence would be discovered, and the entire facility would go into lockdown. Sarah needed to find an alternate escape route, and she needed to find it fast. Sarah accessed the facility's building management system using the stolen security card. The computer showed her detailed blueprints of the entire complex, including maintenance tunnels, ventilation systems, and emergency exits that weren't included in her original intelligence briefing. A maintenance tunnel ran beneath the building, connecting to the facility's power plant located 500 meters outside the main perimeter. If she could reach that tunnel, she might be able to escape before the lockdown trapped her inside with 48 remaining guards who would soon be hunting for her. Sarah left the server room and made her way toward the maintenance access point shown on the blueprints. She moved carefully but quickly, knowing that stealth was less important now than speed. Every corner she turned could bring her face to face with another guard, and without her cloaking device, she would have to eliminate any threats to maintain her operational security. The maintenance access was located in the facility's basement, 2 floors below her current position. Sarah found the stairwell and began descending, listening carefully for any sounds that might indicate approaching security personnel. The chemical smell that had bothered her on the upper floors was stronger here, mixed with the odor of machine oil and industrial solvents. She reached the basement level and followed the corridor toward the maintenance area. The lighting was dimmer here, and the walls were lined with pipes and electrical conduits that created plenty of shadows to hide in. Sarah felt slightly more confident about her chances of remaining undetected. But as she rounded the final corner before the maintenance access, she came face to face with 3 guards conducting an unscheduled security sweep. They were as surprised to see her as she was to encounter them, but their training was excellent. All 3 began reaching for their weapons simultaneously. Sarah had no choice but to engage. The confined space of the corridor would work to her advantage, preventing them from flanking her or using their superior numbers effectively. She launched herself at the nearest guard, knowing that eliminating him quickly would reduce the odds against her. Her first attack was a devastating knee strike to his solar plexus, followed immediately by a palm strike to his nose that drove bone fragments into his brain. He dropped without making a sound. The second guard managed to clear his holster, But Sarah's training in close-quarters combat gave her the advantage. She disarmed him with a wrist lock that shattered 3 bones, then ended the fight with a precise strike to his carotid artery. The third guard had backed away and was raising his weapon to fire when Sarah threw the second guard's pistol with deadly accuracy. The heavy metal struck his forehead with tremendous force, knocking him unconscious before he collapsed to the floor. Sarah stood breathing heavily, surrounded by 3 more bodies. The mission had gone from intelligence gathering to something much more deadly. She was now deep in hostile territory with her presence known to facility security, and her extraction window was closing rapidly. She dragged the bodies into a storage room and continued toward the maintenance tunnel. Behind her, an alarm began to sound throughout the facility. Her presence had been discovered, and now all 50 guards would be mobilized to hunt her down. The blaring alarm echoed through the concrete corridors as Sarah reached the maintenance tunnel entrance. Red emergency lights bathed everything in an eerie glow, and she could hear boots pounding on floors above her as guards mobilized throughout the facility. Her window for a quiet escape had slammed shut, but the tunnel still offered her best chance of survival. Sarah used the stolen security card to access the heavy steel door leading to the maintenance tunnel. The electronic lock disengaged with a soft click, and she pulled the door open to reveal a narrow passage barely wide enough for one person. The tunnel stretched into darkness, lit only by occasional maintenance lights that cast weird shadows on the damp walls. Before entering the tunnel, Sarah took a moment to sabotage the door's locking mechanism using a small explosive charge from her equipment kit. The blast would seal the passage behind her, buying precious time by forcing the guards to find another route to pursue her. She activated the charge and stepped into the tunnel as the door swung shut behind her. The explosion was muffled but effective. Sarah felt the vibration through the tunnel walls and knew the entrance was now impassable. But her relief was short-lived as she realized the tunnel was not as deserted as she had hoped. Voices echoed from somewhere ahead of her, growing louder. As maintenance workers responded to the facility's alarm, Sarah pressed herself against the tunnel wall and listened carefully. At least 4 voices were approaching her position, speaking in the same Eastern European language she had heard from the guards. The maintenance workers were probably armed and would certainly report her presence if they spotted her. She needed to neutralize them quickly and quietly. In the confined space of the tunnel, firearms would be too loud and might damage critical infrastructure that she needed to use for her escape. Sarah drew her tactical knife and prepared for close combat in the darkness. The first maintenance worker appeared around a bend in the tunnel, carrying a flashlight and moving cautiously toward the sealed door behind Sarah. She struck from the shadows with lethal precision, her knife finding the space between his ribs and penetrating directly to his heart. He died silently, his flashlight clattering to the tunnel floor. The other 3 workers heard the noise and called out to their colleague. When he didn't respond, they became suspicious and began approaching more carefully. Sarah picked up the dropped flashlight and threw it further down the tunnel, creating a distraction that drew them away from her position. As they moved past her hiding spot, Sarah eliminated them one by one. Years of training in silent elimination techniques made the task grimly efficient. Each target was dispatched with a single, precise knife thrust that prevented any outcry. Within 2 minutes, all 4 maintenance workers were dead, and Sarah continued through the tunnel unopposed. The passage seemed to stretch forever, sloping gradually upward as it led toward the external power plant. Sarah's watch showed that 23 minutes had passed since the alarm sounded. By now, the facility's security teams would have discovered at least some of the bodies she had left behind. They would know they were dealing with a highly skilled operative, not a common intruder. Sarah reached a junction where the main tunnel split into 3 smaller passages. According to the facility blueprints stored in her memory, the center passage led to the power plant while the other 2 connected to water treatment facilities. She was about to take the center tunnel when she heard something that made her freeze. Dogs. The distinctive sound of tracking dogs echoed from behind her in the main tunnel. The facility's security team had brought in canines to follow her scent trail, and the confined space of the tunnel would make it impossible for her to avoid them. Sarah realized she needed to change her escape plan immediately. Instead of continuing toward the power plant, Sarah chose the left tunnel that led to the water treatment facility. The chemical environment there might mask her scent and confuse the tracking dogs. It would also put more distance between her and her pursuers, while she figured out an alternative escape route. The water treatment tunnel was even narrower than the main passage, and the air was thick with humidity and the sharp smell of chlorine. Sarah could hear the mechanical sounds of pumps and filters growing louder as she approached the treatment plant. Behind her, the baying of the dogs was getting closer despite her attempt to throw them off the scent. Sarah emerged from the tunnel into the water treatment facility's main pump room. The space was filled with massive pipes and industrial equipment that created a maze of hiding places. More importantly, she could see external windows near the ceiling that might provide an escape route if she could find a way to reach them. As she surveyed the room, Sarah heard voices from the tunnel behind her. The security team with the dogs had reached the junction and were deciding which passage to follow. She had perhaps 2 minutes before they determined her actual route and arrived at the pump room. Sarah began climbing the industrial equipment, using pipes and mounting brackets as handholds to reach the high windows. The years she had spent rock climbing served her well as she navigated the complex maze of machinery. The external windows were designed to provide natural light to the facility, not as escape routes, but they were large enough for a person to fit through. She reached the window level and examined the latching mechanism. The windows were designed to open for ventilation, but they had been painted shut from years of neglect. Sarah used her knife to score the paint around the window frame, then applied pressure to force it open. The old hinges groaned in protest but finally gave way, allowing cool mountain air to flow into the humid pump room. Sarah was halfway through the window when the security team burst into the pump room below. The dogs immediately picked up her scent and began barking frantically while pointing toward her position near the ceiling. Automatic weapons fire erupted as the guards spotted her silhouette against the window opening. Bullets sparked off the metal pipes around her as Sarah completed her exit and tumbled to the ground outside the treatment facility. She found herself in a small courtyard surrounded by high concrete walls topped with razor wire. The courtyard was clearly designed to prevent exactly the kind of escape she was attempting, but at least she was outside the main building and had some room to maneuver. The facility's external floodlights illuminated the courtyard like daylight, eliminating any shadows she might have used for concealment. Sarah could see guard towers positioned around the facility's perimeter, and she was certain that snipers were already taking aim at her position. She needed cover, and she needed it immediately. A service building stood against one wall of the courtyard, probably housing electrical equipment for the treatment facility. Sarah sprinted toward it as rifle fire began erupting from the guard towers. Bullets struck the concrete around her feet, sending chips of stone flying as she dove behind the service building. The structure provided temporary shelter, but Sarah knew it wouldn't protect her for long. The guards would soon surround the courtyard and eliminate any chance of escape. She needed to create a significant distraction that would give her the opportunity to reach the facility's perimeter wall. Sarah examined her remaining equipment and found exactly what she needed. 3 small explosive charges remained in her kit, originally intended for destroying evidence if the mission went wrong. If she could use them to damage the water treatment facility's main systems, the resulting chaos might provide the distraction she needed. She worked quickly to attach the charges to critical pipes and electrical systems connected to the service building. The explosions would shut down water treatment for the entire facility and possibly flood several buildings with contaminated water. More importantly, the emergency response would draw guards away from the perimeter and give her a chance to escape. Sarah set the timer for 30 seconds and then ran toward the courtyard wall. She was still 15 feet away when the charges detonated behind her. The explosions were much larger than she had expected, sending a column of water and debris high into the night sky. Emergency sirens joined the facility's alarm system in a cacophony of sound that could probably be heard for miles. The distraction worked perfectly. Guards throughout the facility abandoned their posts to respond to what appeared to be a catastrophic system failure. Sarah used their confusion to scale the courtyard wall, ignoring the razor wire that shredded her tactical suit and left bloody cuts across her arms and legs. She dropped to the ground on the other side and found herself outside the facility's main perimeter. Freedom was within reach, but she could already hear vehicles starting up inside the compound. The hunt was about to expand beyond the facility's walls, and Sarah still had to cover several miles of mountainous terrain before reaching her extraction point. Sarah hit the ground running as she cleared the facility's perimeter wall. The mountain terrain stretched before her in rolling waves of rock and scrub vegetation, illuminated by the harsh glare of searchlights now sweeping the area behind her. The facility's emergency response had created exactly the chaos she needed, but it also meant that every remaining guard would soon be mobilized to hunt her down. Her extraction point was located 12 miles northwest of the facility, where a helicopter would wait for exactly 30 minutes starting at dawn. Sarah checked her watch and calculated she had 4 hours to cover the distance while evading pursuit through unfamiliar mountain terrain. The task would have been challenging under normal circumstances, but with multiple teams of armed guards tracking her, it seemed almost impossible. Behind her, Sarah could hear vehicles roaring to life as the facility's security forces organized their pursuit. The mountains would limit where vehicles could travel, but they also had advantages she lacked: local knowledge, superior numbers, and communication equipment that would allow them to coordinate their search efforts. Sarah began climbing the first ridge using techniques she had learned during mountain warfare training. She stayed off obvious paths and avoided silhouetting herself against the sky, choosing routes that would be difficult for vehicles to follow. The physical exertion helped warm her body after the cold night air, but it also increased her oxygen consumption and would tire her more quickly at the high altitude. As she reached the crest of the first ridge, Sarah paused to assess her situation. The facility behind her was brightly lit, and she could see at least 6 vehicles spreading out in different directions to begin their search pattern. Spotlights from the guard towers swept across the mountainside, creating moving pools of light that she would need to avoid. Sarah activated her emergency beacon, sending a coded signal to her extraction team that would inform them of her compromised status. The signal would also provide her exact GPS coordinates to her handlers, allowing them to track her progress toward the pickup point. But it was a double-edged tool. If the facility's security team had the right equipment, they might be able to triangulate her signal and determine her location. She continued moving northwest, following a route that took her along ridgelines, where possible. The higher elevations would give her better visibility of pursuing forces, while making it harder for ground vehicles to follow her trail. But the exposed positions also made her more vulnerable to the helicopters she could now hear approaching from the south. The first helicopter appeared over the facility 10 minutes after Sarah had cleared the perimeter. It was a military-style aircraft equipped with thermal imaging equipment and high-powered searchlights. Sarah watched from her hiding place behind a cluster of rocks as the aircraft began a systematic search pattern, working outward from the facility in expanding circles. Sarah knew that her body heat would show up clearly on thermal imaging equipment, especially against the cool mountain rocks. She needed to find shelter that would mask her thermal signature, or find a way to confuse the imaging systems. Rock formations and caves would provide some protection, but the mountains in this area were relatively barren and offered limited hiding places. As the helicopter's search pattern brought it closer to her position, Sarah spotted something that might save her life. A small stream ran through a valley about 500 meters from her current location. The flowing water would be several degrees warmer than the surrounding rocks, and might mask her thermal signature if she could reach it without being detected. Sarah began moving toward the stream, using every piece of cover available to avoid the helicopter's searchlight. The aircraft was methodically examining every rock formation and depression that could hide a person, and she could see the bright beam getting closer to her position with each pass. She was still 200 meters from the stream when the helicopter's searchlight swept directly over her hiding place. Sarah pressed herself flat against the ground behind a low rock outcropping, knowing that any movement would instantly reveal her position. The light lingered for several seconds that felt like hours, then continued its sweep of the surrounding area. Sarah reached the stream just as a second helicopter joined the search from the north. The water was ice cold from mountain snow runoff, but she waded into the shallow current and began following it downstream toward her extraction point. The flowing water would mask her footprints and hopefully confuse the thermal imaging equipment that was now scanning the entire area. The stream led through a narrow canyon that provided excellent cover from aerial observation. Sarah made good time following the watercourse, but she could hear ground vehicles on the ridges above her, their engines straining as drivers pushed them through the difficult terrain. Radio chatter echoed off the canyon walls as the search teams coordinated their efforts to box her in. After following the stream for 2 miles, Sarah encountered her first major obstacle. The canyon ended at a steep cliff where the water tumbled down in a 30-foot waterfall. She could climb around the obstacle, but doing so would expose her to the helicopters that were now working in coordinated patterns above the canyon. Sarah decided to take the risk and began climbing the rock face beside the waterfall. The wet stone was treacherous and her hands were numb from the cold water, but she managed to find handholds and work her way upward. She was halfway up the cliff when spotlights from both helicopters converged on her position. "Target acquired," the voice carried clearly through the night air, transmitted by radio between the aircraft crews. Sarah knew she had seconds before weapons fire would begin. She abandoned her careful climb and scrambled desperately toward the top of the cliff, knowing that her only chance was to reach cover before the gunners could line up their shots. Automatic weapons fire erupted from the helicopters as Sarah pulled herself over the edge of the cliff. Bullets sparked off the rocks around her, sending stone fragments flying as she rolled behind a boulder. The gunfire was accurate and intense, indicating that these were not facility security guards but military personnel with advanced combat training. Sarah found herself on a high plateau with limited cover and 2 helicopters circling like mechanical vultures above her. The aircraft were too high for her to engage effectively with her sidearm, and they had enough firepower to destroy any hiding place she might find. She needed a new strategy, something that would turn their advantages against them. The plateau was dotted with loose rocks and boulders that had been weathered away from the cliff faces over thousands of years. Sarah began moving between these formations, timing her movements to avoid the searchlights while working toward the northern edge of the plateau. If she could reach the next valley, the terrain would force the helicopters to fly lower and reduce their maneuverability. As she moved, Sarah noticed something interesting about the search patterns. The helicopters were maintaining specific distances from each other and following predetermined routes that suggested they were following protocols designed to prevent them from accidentally firing on each other. Those protocols might give her an opportunity if she could position herself correctly. Sarah reached the northern edge of the plateau and found herself looking down into a deep valley filled with thick forest. The tree cover would provide excellent concealment from aerial observation, but reaching it would require descending a steep slope while exposed to fire from both aircraft. She waited until both helicopters were positioned at the farthest points of their search pattern, then began her descent. The slope was covered with loose scree that made silent movement impossible, but it also meant she could move very quickly by essentially skiing down on the loose stones. Sarah was halfway down the slope when the helicopters spotted her movement and began converging on her position. She could see muzzle flashes from their door guns as bullets began impacting around her, but the steep angle and her rapid movement made her a difficult target. She reached the tree line just as both aircraft arrived overhead, their searchlights probing the forest canopy above her. Under the cover of the trees, Sarah felt marginally safer, but she knew the pursuit was far from over. Ground teams would soon arrive to search the forest, and they would have tracking dogs to follow her scent trail. She had covered 6 miles of the 12-mile journey to her extraction point, but the remaining distance would take her through the most dangerous part of the pursuit zone. Through the forest canopy above, Sarah could see the helicopters maintaining their positions, waiting for ground teams to arrive and continue the hunt. She checked her watch and realized she had less than 2 hours remaining before dawn. If she wasn't at the extraction point when the helicopter arrived, she would be stranded in hostile territory with no backup plan for escape. Sarah pushed deeper into the forest, knowing that every minute of delay increased the chances that she would be trapped by the converging search teams. Behind her, she could hear vehicles arriving at the plateau and men shouting orders as they organized to pursue her into the trees. The dense forest provided Sarah with her first real cover since escaping the facility, but it also slowed her movement considerably. Ancient pine trees grew so closely together that she had to squeeze between their trunks and the forest floor. was carpeted with decades of fallen needles that muffled sound, but made it impossible to move silently. Every step seemed to echo in the stillness, and Sarah knew that tracking dogs would have no difficulty following her scent trail through this terrain. Behind her, Sarah could hear the search teams entering the forest. Men shouted coordinates and instructions to each other as they spread out in a skirmish line designed to sweep the entire area. The helicopters continued circling overhead, their searchlights probing through gaps in the canopy and creating moving patches of harsh white light on the forest floor. Sarah checked her GPS coordinates and calculated that she still had 4 miles to cover before reaching the extraction point. The dense forest would slow her progress significantly, and she was running out of time. Dawn was less than 90 minutes away, and her extraction window would only remain open for 30 minutes after sunrise. As she pushed through a particularly thick stand of trees, Sarah heard something that made her freeze in terror. The distinctive baying of bloodhounds echoed through the forest much closer than she had expected. The dogs had been brought up from the vehicles below and were already following her scent trail. In this confined terrain, they would catch up to her within minutes. Sarah needed to break her scent trail or eliminate the dogs, but both options would require her to stop moving toward the extraction point. Every second of delay reduced her chances of reaching safety, but being caught by the tracking dogs would end the mission immediately. She spotted a small creek running through the forest and waded into the icy water, hoping to confuse the dogs' sense of smell. The stream was only knee-deep, but it provided a corridor through the dense trees that allowed her to move more quickly. Sarah followed the creek for half a mile, then climbed out on a rocky section where her footprints would be harder to track. The baying of the dogs grew louder and more excited as they reached the point where Sarah had entered the creek. She could hear their handlers shouting encouragement as the animals cast about, trying to pick up her scent trail again. The confusion would buy her perhaps 10 minutes before they determined her exit point and resumed their pursuit. Sarah climbed a steep ridge that rose above the forest canopy, trading concealment for speed as she worked her way toward higher ground. From the ridge, she could see lights from vehicles positioned around the entire search area. The security force had established a perimeter that extended far beyond her original assessment of their capabilities. This wasn't just facility security. She was being hunted by what appeared to be a military unit with significant resources and training. As she moved along the ridge, Sarah spotted something that changed her entire tactical situation. A third helicopter was approaching from the east, and this aircraft was different from the search helicopters. It was larger, heavier, and equipped with what appeared to be serious military hardware. Sarah recognized it as an attack helicopter, designed for eliminating ground targets rather than searching for them. The arrival of the attack helicopter meant that the security force had decided she was too dangerous to capture alive. They were now committed to killing her rather than risking her escape with the intelligence she had gathered. Sarah realized that her mission had escalated from intelligence gathering to a fight for survival against overwhelming odds. The attack helicopter began a systematic destruction of the forest canopy, using its chain gun to clear potential hiding places ahead of the advancing ground teams. Trees exploded into splinters as the heavy rounds tore through them, creating a path of devastation that would force Sarah into increasingly limited terrain. Sarah abandoned the ridge and dropped back into the forest, knowing that staying in the open would make her an easy target for the attack helicopter. She needed to use the trees for cover while finding a way to eliminate or evade the pursuing forces. The bloodhounds were getting closer, their excited barking indicating they had picked up her trail again. Moving through a dense thicket, Sarah encountered her first ground team. 3 soldiers were advancing through the trees in a wedge formation, their weapons ready and their movements coordinated like experienced military personnel. They wore night vision equipment and moved with the confidence of men who knew they had their quarry trapped. Sarah positioned herself behind a fallen log and waited for them to pass her hiding place. As the lead soldier moved within striking distance, she erupted from concealment with deadly efficiency. Her tactical knife found the gap between his body armor plates, penetrating directly to his heart. He died silently, his weapon clattering to the forest floor. The second soldier turned toward the sound and found Sarah already inside his guard. A precise strike to his throat crushed his windpipe, preventing any outcry that might alert the rest of the search team. The third soldier managed to raise his weapon, but Sarah's years of close-quarters combat training gave her the advantage in the confined forest terrain. She disarmed him with a wrist lock that shattered bone, then ended the fight with a strike that severed his spinal cord at the base of his skull. 3 more members of the hunting party were eliminated, but Sarah knew that many more were converging on her position. The attack helicopter had heard the brief commotion and was directing its attention toward Sarah's area. The chain gun began methodically destroying trees around her position, working in a pattern designed to eliminate any possible hiding places. Sarah realized she needed to move immediately or be caught in the devastating firepower. As she moved away from the bodies, Sarah heard the bloodhounds reach the location where she had ambushed the soldiers. The dogs became frantic when they encountered the scent of death mixed with her trail, their handlers struggling to maintain control as the animals sensed the violence that had occurred. Sarah reached a clearing in the forest and found herself facing an impossible situation. Open ground stretched for 200 meters in every direction, offering no cover from the helicopters circling overhead. But staying in the forest would mean certain capture by the ground teams that were now closing in from multiple directions. She made a desperate decision and sprinted across the clearing, betting that her speed and unpredictable movement would make her a difficult target for the helicopter gunners. Searchlights immediately locked onto her position, and the attack helicopter began firing its chain gun in controlled bursts, designed to herd her toward the waiting ground teams. Sarah zigzagged across the open ground as bullets churned the earth around her feet. She could see muzzle flashes from soldiers positioned at the far edge of the clearing, their automatic weapons adding to the deadly crossfire. Somehow she reached the tree line on the opposite side without being hit, diving behind a massive pine tree as heavy rounds shredded the bark around her. The GPS on her wrist showed that she was now only 2 miles from the extraction point, but those 2 miles included the most dangerous terrain of her entire escape route. The forest ended at the extraction zone, which was located in an alpine meadow surrounded by bare ridges. Reaching the helicopter would require crossing completely open ground, while under fire from multiple aircraft and ground teams. Sarah checked her remaining equipment and found she had 1 fragmentation grenade left in her kit. The explosive might be enough to take out one of the helicopters if she could get close enough, but using it would reveal her exact position to every enemy in the area. As she considered her options, Sarah heard something that made her heart race with hope. The distant sound of rotor blades was approaching from the northwest, the direction of her extraction point. Her rescue helicopter was arriving on schedule, but it was flying directly into a war zone where 3 enemy aircraft were waiting to intercept it. Sarah activated her emergency beacon and began transmitting a warning to the incoming aircraft. The extraction team needed to know they were flying into a trap, but communicating with them would also alert the enemy forces to the helicopter's approach. The bloodhounds had reached the clearing and were baying excitedly as they followed her scent trail across the open ground. Behind them, Sarah could see at least 20 soldiers emerging from the forest, their weapons trained on her position. The attack helicopter was repositioning for a direct assault on her hiding place. Sarah realized that her only chance of survival was to create enough chaos and confusion to allow the extraction helicopter to reach the pickup zone safely. She would have to fight her way through the remaining enemy forces, using everything she had learned during years of special operations training. The final phase of her escape was about to begin, and Sarah knew that failure would mean not only her death but the loss of intelligence that could prevent biological attacks on innocent civilians. She gripped her weapon tightly and prepared for the most dangerous 2 miles of her life. The sound of the approaching extraction helicopter grew louder, and Sarah could see lights in the distance that indicated her rescue was only minutes away. But between her current position and safety stood the most dangerous opponents she had ever faced, and Sarah broke from her cover behind the pine tree and began the final sprint toward the extraction zone. The approaching helicopter's rotors created a rhythmic thunder that echoed off the mountainsides, growing louder with each passing second. Behind her, the enemy forces were converging in a coordinated assault designed to eliminate her before rescue could arrive. The attack helicopter immediately spotted her movement and began firing controlled bursts from its chain gun. The heavy rounds chewed up the forest floor around Sarah's feet, sending geysers of dirt and shattered wood into the air. She ran in a serpentine pattern, using every piece of cover available while maintaining her general direction toward the extraction point. A team of 6 soldiers appeared directly in her path, having anticipated her route and positioned themselves to intercept her. They opened fire with automatic weapons, forcing Sarah to dive behind a fallen log as bullets whined overhead. She was pinned down with enemies behind her, and the extraction helicopter approaching a landing zone that was about to become a battlefield. Sarah pulled the pin from her remaining fragmentation grenade and counted off 3 seconds before hurling it toward the soldier's position. The explosion was devastating in the confined forest terrain, eliminating 4 of the 6 men instantly and leaving the other 2 wounded and disoriented. Sarah used the chaos to break from cover and continue her desperate race toward freedom. The edge of the forest appeared ahead of her, marked by a line where the dense trees gave way to the alpine meadow that served as the extraction zone. The meadow was a natural clearing about 500 meters across, surrounded by bare ridges that offered no cover whatsoever. Crossing that open ground while under fire from multiple aircraft would be like running through a shooting gallery. As Sarah reached the tree line, she could see her extraction helicopter approaching from the northwest. The aircraft was flying, low and fast, its pilot clearly aware of the dangerous situation. But the 3 enemy helicopters were already moving to intercept, their weapons systems armed and ready to engage the rescue aircraft. Sarah's radio crackled with an encrypted transmission from the extraction team. "Phoenix, this is Eagle 1. We have visual on multiple hostile aircraft. Recommend you mark your position with smoke and prepare for immediate extraction under fire. Eagle 1, be advised there are at least 20 hostiles on the ground with heavy weapons," Sarah replied as she activated a smoke grenade from her kit. Red smoke began billowing from her position at the forest edge, clearly marking her location for both friend and foe. The extraction helicopter accelerated toward the smoke marker, while the lead enemy aircraft opened fire with missiles. Sarah watched in horror as 2 heat-seeking missiles streaked toward her rescue helicopter, their contrails drawing deadly lines across the dawn sky. The extraction pilot was clearly experienced in combat operations. He deployed chaff and flares while executing evasive maneuvers that would have been impossible for a less skilled aviator. Both missiles were successfully decoyed, exploding harmlessly. Away from the aircraft as it continued its approach to the landing zone, Sarah sprinted from the tree line into the open meadow as ground fire erupted from positions around the entire perimeter. Muzzle flashes lit up the dawn darkness as soldiers opened fire with everything they had, determined to kill her before she could reach safety. Bullets whined past her head and kicked up dirt around her feet as she ran toward the approaching helicopter. The attack helicopter was maneuvering for another missile shot when the extraction aircraft's door gunner opened fire with a heavy machine gun. Tracers arced across the sky as the 2 aircraft engaged in aerial combat, while Sarah continued her desperate sprint across the open ground. A sniper's bullet grazed her shoulder, spinning her around and nearly knocking her to the ground. Sarah kept running despite the pain, knowing that stopping meant certain death. The extraction helicopter was now only 100 meters away, its side door open and crew members gesturing frantically for her to hurry. More soldiers appeared on the ridges surrounding the meadow, their automatic weapons adding to the withering crossfire. Sarah could see impacts in the ground all around her as dozens of weapons targeted her position. The fact that she hadn't been hit was purely a matter of luck, and the difficulty of hitting a moving target at long range. The extraction helicopter touched down 50 meters from Sarah's position, its rotors whipping up a cloud of dust and debris that provided some concealment from the enemy marksman. The door gunner continued firing at targets on the surrounding ridges, while the crew chief waved Sarah toward the aircraft. Sarah was 30 meters from safety when an explosion knocked her to the ground. One of the enemy helicopters had fired, a rocket that detonated just behind her, the blast wave slamming her forward onto her face. She struggled to her feet, blood running from cuts on her forehead, and continued stumbling toward the extraction aircraft. The attack helicopter was lining up for a direct assault on the grounded rescue aircraft when something unexpected happened. A second extraction helicopter appeared from behind the eastern ridge, catching the enemy completely by surprise. This aircraft was heavily armed and immediately engaged the attack helicopter with air-to-air missiles. Sarah reached the extraction helicopter and was hauled inside by strong hands as the aircraft began lifting off. Through the open door, she could see the aerial battle raging above the meadow as the two extraction helicopters engaged all three enemy aircraft simultaneously. "Get us out of here," the crew chief shouted to the pilot as automatic weapons fire from the ground began impacting the helicopter's armored hull. The aircraft accelerated rapidly, climbing steeply to gain altitude and distance from the enemy forces. Sarah collapsed onto the floor of the helicopter, exhaustion and adrenaline finally overwhelming her system. The crew chief was already working on her wounded shoulder while the door gunner continued returning fire at ground targets. Through the window she could see the facility in the distance, emergency lights still flashing from the damage she had caused during her escape. "Phoenix, this is Control." Her handler's voice crackled through the aircraft's communication system. "Confirm that you have the package." Sarah reached into her equipment pouch and pulled out the data storage device containing the intelligence she had gathered from the facility's servers. Despite everything that had happened, the mission's primary objective had been accomplished. The evidence of the biological weapons conspiracy was safe, and soon it would be in the hands of authorities who could act on it. "Package is secure," Sarah replied, watching the mountainous terrain pass beneath the helicopter as they flew toward safety. "Recommend immediate action on the intelligence. The threat is larger and more immediate than we believed." Behind them, the second extraction helicopter had successfully engaged and damaged two of the enemy aircraft, forcing them to break off their pursuit. The aerial battle was over, and both rescue helicopters were now flying in formation toward the extraction point where Sarah would be debriefed and her wounds treated. As the adrenaline began wearing off, Sarah started to comprehend the full scope of what had happened during the night. She had infiltrated a heavily guarded facility, gathered crucial intelligence about a biological weapons conspiracy, and fought her way through 50 armed guards to complete her escape. The mission that was supposed to be a quiet intelligence gathering operation had turned into one of the most dangerous extractions in Special Forces history. The helicopter crew was professional and efficient, treating her wounds while maintaining security protocols. Sarah knew that within hours, the intelligence she had gathered would be analyzed by experts who would use it to prevent biological attacks on civilian populations. The cost had been high. 50 lives had been lost during her escape. But the information she carried would potentially save thousands of innocent people. As the helicopter flew toward the sunrise, Sarah allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The mission was complete. The intelligence was secure, and she was alive to fight another day. In the dangerous world of special operations, that counted as an unqualified success.